Hey y'all, my name is Luke. I make bags from high performance materials that would otherwise be discarded. Today I'm in the shop making a U-zip duffel from an old slingshot wing, which is basically like a handheld kite, and it's a ripstop fabric that I laminate with something called insignia fabric from Challenge, which is what they use for building kites, as well as doing numbers and logos on sails. That adds a little bit of structure to it and it makes it a little quieter. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's just go ahead and get started and cutting out all the pieces we need to make this and get going on making it. All right, so I've got all my pieces cut out here to make a U-zip duffel. I've got the main side panel with the lid, which I haven't cut out yet. I got the zipper to go around the U shape. I've got the two number 10 zipper pulls with the little grab tabs on the end. And I've got all my reinforcement panels for the strap attachment. So this is the other side here. That'll go over here eventually, and these are the straps that get sewn on to the side for grab handles. But since this is being made out of an old kite that I have reinforced with insignia fabric, this stuff is not the thickest, so if I'm attaching straps to it, I like to reinforce them with some more insignia that I put over the top of this B-grade sailcloth strip, and that way the strap is super well sewn in there. And also I've got this side panel here with the attachment point for the over-the-shoulder strap. Same for the other side, and then the pocket on the end, and then finally the bottom panel. So the only thing that I don't have here is the over-the-shoulder strap, which I'll make later, but let's take all this stuff over to the machines and get started making it. So before I take it over to the sewing machines, actually I'm gonna do this reinforcement patches like I was talking about on the back side of these panels. Since this is all made of some pretty thin kite fabric, what I do is I take this very sticky insignia fabric, which is also made by Challenge sailcloth, which, you know, most of these kite canopies and leading edges are made from the same stuff. And I have my marks on the back here for where these straps get sewn on. And I just go ahead and stick it down like that so that there's this B-grade sailcloth, which is super tough, really good stuff, holds the stitch really nicely, and then insignia fabric sticking it down so that it doesn't move around. I'll stick it in the heat press for a second to make sure it adheres fully, and then I will take them over to the sewing machines and stitch down these straps. So that way the stitches that go through the 1-inch webbing that I use for the grab handles has a bunch of more reinforcement going through the back here and make sure that you can yank on those handles all day and it won't come out. So all right, now that we got that on there, let's go ahead and take them to the machines. All right, so first things first is attach these grab handles. So once I have my reinforcement on there, now I can go ahead and start at the bottom here, make sure we're square, make the turn, and then I have my marks of how high to go up. I'll make sure I'm right on the edge there. And then see where my marks are. One more, there we go. Now I'm at the mark and I can go ahead and back tack here. And then make the turn again. And then I want to run my hand along the webbing to make sure there's no twists in it, because once you stitch it down, obviously it's kind of a pain to get it back up. So these slingshot kites are super fun to make bags from. It is a little bit more extra work to laminate every piece of them like this, just to make sure it kind of quiets down the kite fabric. The kite fabric by itself, the canopy that is pretty loud and crinkly. So adding this insignia Challenge cloth, which is what they use for numbers and sail logos and stuff like that, definitely helps to quiet it down and also makes it stronger, you know, but it does add some time to get it right, and then the kites, like sails, have shape to them to make them ideal wings. And so there are some like tiny little tucks, like these curves are, or these seams are curved, so once I cut them out and make them flat, there is some imperfection with the lamination that the heat press really helps out with. So got that one on, let's do the other one now. So the U-zip duffels, I really like the way that it opens up nice and wide, gives you easy access to your gear and whatnot you have in there. But the curved zippers are more difficult to do, and they kind of want to be flat and straight. So the way that I've figured out how to do it, just by trial and error basically, is to leave this panel on here, and what I'll do is I'll cut it out, sew the zipper onto this one, and then sew it onto there, so that way, you know, whatever graphics are on here will hopefully transfer nicely in between the zipper. So let's attach this last side of the grab handle here. If you see here, this is a little stiffener batten thing that they attach to the trailing edge of this old Javelin wing so that you don't get fluttering happening when you're using it. And it's no problem for the machine to go through this kind of stuff. Once you start putting in some fiberglass battens, though, then that is an issue. You want to pull those out before stitching it. But all these kites and wings are put together with triple stitch machine, so it's not a zigzag. Well, it is, it looks like a zigzag, but it is a machine that goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there we go. All right, now we got this on there. We can go ahead and slice this out so we can attach the main zipper. So I'm just going to go ahead and slice this out super carefully, following the line that I drew on here from the pattern. All right, so now I've got that. I've got my number 10 Eurotech water-resistant zipper from YKK, and I can go ahead and get started here, do a nice back tack, and then follow the curve. So anytime you're going around curves, you definitely want to slow down to make sure you're catching the right angle, and then get to the straightaways and kind of speed up a little bit. So to make sure that everything works out centered, what I do is put a little, I do have a mark on where the center is, but I'll go ahead and trim off the ends here. What I found is the lid needs to be a little bit longer that way, but I have a mark right there at the center of my lid, and I'll just use my thread snips here to do the other end. So just folding it in half, finding that exact spot, doing a tiny little snip in the zipper, so now I know where the middle is, and I can match up that little snip I just did with the mark from the pattern, and it's right there. So get it going. Needle positioning helps, always keeps the needle down, and that way you can get some stitches in. So here, you know, the zipper wants to be straight, so what I find that helps is if you just pull it apart here, it's a little more malleable, or a little more flexible, I guess would be the word. So again, just slowing down around the curves, making sure we're not getting any tucks. Do a nice back tack at the end. So as we can see, that'll match up the graphics nicely. So same thing on the other side. And once we get it going, then I can pull apart the zipper here. So I've been really stoked to do these bags with homies at Slingshot out in the Hood River. I'm a big addict to the foiling, wing foiling. I'm hoping to get into parawinging this summer or spring. And yeah, it's just super exciting for me to be making stuff from retired kites or prototype kites, and especially stuff that has graphics action on. This is a first generation Javelin 5.5 that this duffel bag is being made from. So it's just a cool little bit of difference from the sails that I'm used to making stuff from. It's a different fabric, but it's more graphically interesting. Anyway, all right, now we've got that on there. Let's go over to the binding machine and put some binding tape on the inside of the zipper. So now I'm at the binding machine. I can go ahead and, since the zipper is nicely stitched on, I can go ahead and bind around this whole thing. The curved zippers are more, sometimes, you know, with the standard simple duffel, since it's a straight zipper, I'll just skip the sewing the zipper on in the first place and just go straight to binding. Plenty strong, but with the curved zipper, it is easier and smarter to get it sewn on before putting the binding tape on. So here's another instance of where the cylinder bed version of a binding attachment enabled machine helps. If it was on a flatbed, you know, going around this kind of curve would be a little trickier. All right, so I've got that on. Now I can grab my number 10 zipper pulls, one going each direction so that we've got a dual direction kind of thing going on here. And I'll thread those on. But you want to make sure that the teeth are starting at exactly the same spot. There we go. Second one's on there now. So go ahead and close this up, and we can go over to the main machine to close up this end and attach this other side. All right, so I've got my little 3/4 inch soft webbing grab pulls here, and I put them right in the middle of the zipper. And I'm just gonna baste them down into place, one on each end, so that way when you're operating the zipper, it gives you something to grab onto. And it's kind of nice how it ends up being just the right width of the zipper. And once I have those on there, I can get the other side. So again, we want the handles to be facing up like this. This is the back side of it. And center this. Yep, we're looking good. Sometimes cutting things that have shape to them, like sails or kites especially, makes the patterns a little wonky, so just got to make sure that everything came out correct. And go across the other end here, make sure to back tack. So now we're here. Looking good, and since we got this stage done, we might as well attach the bottom panel. So this is the same stuff that I use for backpacks. It's the nylon Dyneema nylon sandwich. Super stiff, which makes it a good bottom fabric for abrasion resistance and daily kind of wear and tear. So just attaching it to the back side here. Back tack, nice, and then close off the loop by attaching this side. Nice back tack. All right, now we have the tunnel, as it were, of the bag inside out, obviously still. So just needs to be binding tape, trimmed, and binding tape. But since we're at this machine, let's go ahead and make the end pocket panel. So these are the end panel pieces. One of them is the pockets, the one that has this square top. And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and attach this number 5 standard zip. But first, a new bobbin. Got that zipper sewn on. Now I can get rid of the little thread bits that happen when I change bobbins sometimes, and go ahead and fold it over and top stitch this guy. Now, there's no need to bind this. This fabric is not going to fray, and you know, we just don't need that extra bulk there in the seam either. Then I'll go ahead and get the zipper pull on here. And pick which end panel this is going to go on. Let's do it on this one. So it goes straight across the top here. I do have marks on this end panel so that it's always at the same height. So across the top, moving the zipper pull out of the way. And then I've got this grab handle ready that goes just right along the top of the zipper. So stitch it in, and then I'll start doing the 3 tucks that go into this. It's just a really simple way to add 3-dimensionality to this pocket and make it a little roomy for storage of stuffs. Go across the bottom. That's already done. Okay, and then I'll match those 3 fold tucks, gussets. Again, I didn't go to school for this, so just call them whatever. If it works, it's not stupid, right? There we go. And then get to the other end here. You want a little bit, you don't want it to be like flat across. You do want it to be a little bit longer so that there's room for a person wearing a glove to grab the handle. So there we go, we've got that. And now we can attach our loops for where the over the shoulder strap gets attached. And I do have a little mark right there, right in the center. So that's a nice way to show me where these little dudes go. Make sure tacked in there. Cool. So there we go. We've got our end panel with the zipper, and then we've got our other end panel here with our other side of the duffel strap attachment. There's the mark. Thread this little guy on here. What are these called? Snap hook loops or something like that. They just work better than a normal webbing loop. It is more hardware, but I find that the duffel strap hardware clicks into this nicely and then it swivels and works really well. All right, so now we're ready to bind the insides of the quote-unquote tunnel. So let's trim these guys and go over to the binding machine and get some binding tape on this. All right, so now with the binding machine, we can go ahead and bind up these edges on the inside. Cover up all the stitching. Oh, and we're out of bobbin. I just got a fresh bobbin in here, and I'll continue to bind these seams. Because these will be visible to the user inside the bag, so it's nice to finish them with some binding tape to make it premium, you know, since these bags are not the cheapest. So I try to make them affordable for everyone, but you know, also have bills to pay, so making stuff in the States is inherently going to make things cost a little bit more, just because we don't make a lot of stuff here anymore. You know, all the big production facilities, for the most part, unless you're making stuff for the government, are overseas. So that's where they have all the knowledge and the machines and production capabilities to do things at volume. But here it's just me making bags one at a time. And I want them to be premium while also affordable, so it's kind of a tough line to split. Anyway, enough with my rambling. We've got binding tape on all the seams, so now we can go ahead and close off the ends, and then we'll be back here to put binding tape around that, and then we'll pretty much be done. So these duffels don't take too long to make because there's no seam sealed liner, there's no liner to cut out. Super useful duffels, and they open real wide. So in my opinion, that's a win-win. All right, so what I do on these ends is I start at the bottom here, center it, and just kind of start towards this end. And then I want to make sure that this seam is flipped the right way so that the bottom fabric is the one that's getting the abrasion. Could baste that down ahead of time. That would save you having to think about it when you're actually sewing the end on here. Just generally, I guess, if you have seams that are not top stitched, it is a good idea to baste them down in the orientation that you want them to be. All right, so I ran out of space on the memory card there, but I just closed up both of these ends, and now I can go ahead and trim off all these little bits of binding tape and take it over to the binding machine to close up these ends with some nice binding tape. All right, so because we're not just doing an open-ended seam, we do have to start in an open binding, if that makes sense, if my words are English. So gotta cut off what's sewn together and then start on this here, making sure we have enough thread that it's not gonna get pulled up. So whenever I'm starting and stopping binding seams like this that are not gonna go into a seam like this one is here, just wanna make sure wherever I'm starting and stopping is gonna be like the least visible. So in the top on the inside of the bag, to me, seems like a better place to do that than down below. And I'm just noticing now, I did this seam in the wrong orientation, so it won't be like that. So I'll just fix that as I'm binding over it. You know, a binding stitch is enough to hold on its own. This is a lock stitch kind of thing, if I'm not mistaken, so it is very strong. So there's still plenty of opportunity to fix any little errors like that. And here's another instance of where the cylinder bed comes in handy. This would be a little more difficult to do on a flat bed, I think. I don't know, having never had a proper binding plate put on a flatbed machine, that's just my assumption. So once I get over to where I started, go over a few stitches, and then pull it out, trim, make sure we have enough thread here so it doesn't get pulled out of the needle, and prepare it for the other side. So we're going over that attachment point for where the over the shoulder strap gets clipped onto another time. So we're basting it on there with a back tack, then we're sewing it on with the end panel, and then we're binding over it. So it's plenty strong. It's never going to come out. All right, now we are good to go. We'll just go over to the hot knife and clean up these ends and just get rid of any threads or anything else like that that's poking out. But other than that, I just need to make the strap, and we'll be ready to flip it right side out. So we're over here at the hot knife station. So I can go ahead and close up these ends so they don't fray or come undone. Smooth it out. Make sure there's no like sharp edges or anything. And again, there's different ways of closing binding tape. You can fold it over or stitch it down. I like this method of just hot knifing the ends shut. There we go. And again, the idea of putting all this stuff in at the top here, it'll be less visible to the user, so it's a good way to flip it right side out. So before we flip it right side out, let's just go ahead and make our strap, which we have our 1.5" strap here. We've got 2 swivel plastic metallic hooks, and we've got our 1.5" tri-glide. So I'll close up one end. This bar tacker does 3/4 inch bar tack, so I just put 2 of them next to each other, and we've got 1.5". And I'll run my hand along it to make sure there's no twists. Slide on the tri-glide like so. Thread the second snap hook loop, or plastic metallic swivel snap hook, give this guy a little bit of slack, and then what I do is I pass it through the back side, pass it through the front side, and then put some more bar tacks in there. Shout out to a previous employee I had who taught me this little threading trick, so that way, there we go, we've got our tri-glide on there, and then you can adjust it by just pulling on it that way or pulling on it this way to make it longer. And it's just 3 pieces of hardware to make a duffel strap. All right, so we got it all closed up here, so now we can go ahead and unzip the main opening, which with the Uritex zipper is a little bit more difficult to operate, but you get that water resistance. Now flip it right side out. Probably the most satisfying part of doing this. You get to finally see the end products. Make sure all these little corners and radiuses are all the way flipped out. Cool, and there we go. We've got a duffel bag with a nice wide zip opening, and then we can just go ahead and clip our over-the-shoulder strap onto there. And if we want to, we can cut some zipper pulls with a hot knife. I usually leave these duffels as is, and then we just make sure that, yep, our zipper on this end panel works well. We've got plenty of room in there for phone keys, wallets, all that sort of good stuff. And there we go. U-zip duffel made from an old slingshot wing is ready to go. And yeah, this kind of fiberglass, or not fiberglass, reinforcement in here that keeps the trailing edge from fluttering is kind of in a good place purposefully, so that it holds up this front edge. This kite fabric without the insignia fabric lamination is really thin, so the whole thing just collapses. With the insignia it is better, but it's still not as structured, or doesn't like hold its shape as much as if it was made from a Dacron sail or from, you know, the Kevlar that I have. That stuff holds its shape really well. But there we go. That's how I make a U-zip duffel from start to finish. I think these heat press logos that I'm doing in collab with the fine folks at Slingshot and Ride Engine look really nice, and they stick really well to this kite fabric. And there we go, U-zip duffel, we're ready to go. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see y'all next time.